31. Why does Moses say that the serpent was more cunning than all the beasts of the field? One may probably affirm with truth that the serpent in reality is more cunning than any beast whatever, but the reason why he appears to me to be spoken of in these terms here is on account of the natural proneness of mankind to vice, of which he is the symbol. And by vice I mean concupiscence, inasmuch as those who are devoted to pleasure are more cunning and are the inventors of stratagems and means by which to indulge their passions, being forsooth very crafty in devising plans, both such as favor pleasure and also such as procure means of enjoying it. But it appears to me that since that animal, so superior in wisdom, was about to seduce man, it is not the whole race that is here meant to be spoken of so exceedingly wise, but only that single serpent for the reason above mentioned. 32. Did the serpent speak with a human voice? In the first place, it may be the fact that at the beginning of the world, even the other animals besides men were not entirely destitute of the power of articulate speech, but only that man excelled them in a greater fluency and perspicuity of speech and language. In the second place, when anything very marvelous requires to be done, God changes the subject natures by which he means to operate. Thirdly, because our soul is entirely filled with many errors and rendered deaf to all words except in one or two languages to which it is accustomed, but the souls of those who were first created were rendered acute to thoroughly understand every voice of every kind in order that they might be pure from evil and wholly unpolluted. Since we indeed are not endowed with senses in such perfection, for those which we have received are in some degree depraved, just as the construction of our bodies too is small, but the first created men, as they received bodies of vast size reaching to a gigantic height, must also of necessity have received more accurate senses, and what is more excellent still, a power of examining into and hearing things in a philosophical manner. For those people think, and perhaps with some reason, that they were endowed with such eyes as enabled them to behold even those natures and essences and operations which exist in heaven, as also ears by which they could comprehend every kind of voice and language. 33. Why did the serpent accost the woman and not the man? The serpent, having formed his estimate of virtue, devised a treacherous stratagem against them for the sake of bringing mortality on them. But the woman was more accustomed to be deceived than the man, for his counsels as well as his body are of a masculine sort, and competent to disentangle the notions of seduction. But the mind of the woman is more effeminate, so that through her softness she easily yields and is easily caught by the persuasions of falsehood, which imitate the resemblance of truth. Since therefore in his old age the serpent, the ancients believe that the serpent became young again by casting his skin. Ovid says, Anguibus exuvitur tenui q pella vetus tus, strips himself of his scales from the top of his head to his tail. He by his nakedness reproaches man because he has exchanged death for immortality. His nature is renewed by the beast, and made to resemble every time the woman, when she sees this, is deceived, when she ought rather to have looked upon it as an example, who, while showing his ingenuity towards her, was full of devices, but she was led to desire to acquire a life which should be free from old age and from all decay. 34. Why the serpent tells the woman lies, saying, God has said, Ye shall not eat of every tree in the paradise, when, on the contrary, what God really had said was, Ye shall eat of every tree in the paradise except one. It is a custom for contending arguers to speak falsely in an artful manner, in order to produce ignorance of the real facts, as was done in this case, since the man and woman had been commanded to eat of all the trees but one. But this insidious prompter of wickedness coming in says that the order which they had received was that they should not eat of them all. He brought forward an ambiguous statement as a slippery stumbling block that caused the soul to trip. For this expression, ye shall not eat of every tree, means in the first place either not even of one, which is false, or secondly not of every one, as if he intended to say there are some of which you may, which is true. Therefore he asserts such a falsehood more explicitly. 35. Why, when it was commanded them to avoid eating of one plant alone, the woman made also a further addition to this injunction, saying, He said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it. In the first place, she says this because taste and every other sense after its kind consists in a touch appropriate to it. In the second place, she says it that it may seem to condemn them themselves who did what they had been forbidden. For if even the mere act of touching it was prohibited, how could they who, besides touching the tree, presume to eat of the fruit, and so added a greater transgression to the lesser one, be anything but condemners and punishers of themselves? 36. What is the meaning of the expression, Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil? Whence was it that the serpent found the plural word gods, when there is only one true God, and when this is the first time that he names him? But perhaps this arises from there having been in a certain prescient manner by which he now declared the notion of the multitude of gods, which was at a future time to prevail amongst men. Perhaps history now relates this correctly, as its first being advanced not by any rational being, nor by any creature of the higher class, but as having derived its origin from the most virulent and vile of beasts and serpents, since other similar creatures lie hid under the earth, and their lurking places are in the holes and fissures of the earth. Moreover, it is the inseparable sign of a being endowed with reason to look upon God as essentially one being, but is the mark of a beast to imagine that there are many gods, and these too devoid of reason, and who can scarcely be said with propriety to have any existence at all. Moreover, the devil proceeds with great art, speaking by the mouth of the serpent. For not only is there in the divinity the knowledge of good and evil, but there is also an approval of what is good, and a repudiation of what is evil. But he does not speak of either of these feelings because they were useful, but only suggesting the mere knowledge to do contrary things, namely of good and evil. In the second place, the expression as gods, in the plural number, is in this place not used inconsiderately, but in order to give the idea of there being both a bad and a good God, and these are of a twofold quality. Therefore it is suitable to the notion of particular gods to have a knowledge of contrary things, but the supreme cause is above all others. 37. Why the woman first touched the tree and ate of its fruit, and the man afterwards receiving it from her. The words used first of all by their own intrinsic force assert that it was suitable that immortality and every good thing should be represented as under the power of the man, and death and every evil under that of the woman. But with reference to the mind, the woman, when understood symbolically, is sense, and the man is intellect. Moreover, the outward senses do of necessity touch these things which are perceptible by them, but it is through the medium of the outward senses that things are transmitted to the mind. The outward senses are influenced by the objects which are presented to them, and the intellect by the outward senses. What is the meaning of the expression, and she gave it to her husband to eat with her? What has been just said bears on this point also, since the time is nearly one, and at the same time which the outward senses are influenced by the object which is presented to them, and the intellect has an impression made on it by the outward senses. 39. What is the meaning of the expression, and the eyes of both of them were opened? That they were not created blind is manifest even from this fact, that as all other things, both animals and plants, were created in perfection, so also man must have been adorned with the things which are his most excellent parts, namely eyes. And we may especially prove this, because a little while before the earth-born Adam was giving names to all the animals on the earth. Therefore, it is perfectly plain that he saw them before doing so, unless indeed Moses used the expression eyes in the figurative sense for the vision of the soul, by which alone the perception of good and evil, of which is what is elegant or unsightly, and in fact of all contrary natures arise. But if the eye is to be taken separately as counsel, which is called the warning of the understanding, then again there is a separate eye, which is a certain something devoid of sound reason, which is called opinion. 40. What is the meaning of the expression, because they knew that they were naked? They first arrived at the knowledge of this fact, that is to say, of their nakedness, after they had eaten of the forbidden fruit. Therefore opinion was like the beginning of wickedness, when they perceived that they had not as yet used any covering, inasmuch as all parts of the universe are immortal and incorruptible, but they themselves immediately found themselves in need of some corruptible coverings made with hands. But this knowledge was in the nakedness itself, not as having been in itself the cause of any change, but because their mind now conceived a novelty unlike the rest of the universal world.